Before we start tonight's program, this is a reminder that this episode will address various topics that we've discussed before, especially in tonight's topic, Part 2, Vulnerability and Transparency. These may be sensitive to some of our viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. We remind you to please consult your doctor, your mental health professional, your outreach group, your sponsor, or specialist before adopting any change to your dietary, physical, and/or mental health regime. If you're looking for options to go down with respect to mental health, contact SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, at 1-800-662-HELP. That's 1-800-662-4357. The service is open 24/7, 365 days a year, and is a confidential free information service for individuals and family members facing such stressors. Also, if you're feeling suicidal crisis or emotional distress and need to be put in touch with a crisis center, call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. Or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. You can also text the word HOME to 741-741. Those resources are also available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And then a moment on something that I've been talking about over the last month and a half, and that of something that has become something I'm trying to now fight, as I realized that it was a problem for the last 10 years, but it really took in the form of an exacerbation that happened over the holidays, and that of multiple sclerosis. The National MS Society is a collective of passionate individuals who want to do something about MS now. To move together in a world free of multiple sclerosis. MS stops people from moving. The National MS Society exists to make sure that MS doesn't. If you could say it correctly, you know that's the truth every single time. The National MS Society is a very important organization. They raise a lot of money every year to help find a cure, to help find disease-modifying treatments, but moreover, to help family of those that have multiple sclerosis and those that have multiple sclerosis basically try to live the best life they can in a disease that basically is as individualistic as the next person who has it. Multiple sclerosis is something that I am affected with, but many people are. And we are all trying to find a cure and a day where we don't have multiple sclerosis anymore. To contact the National MS Society, please contact 1-800-344-4867. Again, 1-800-344-4867, or go to their website at nationalmssociety.org. And on that, let's begin. On Tuesday night, we discussed how important transparency and vulnerability is to ourselves, to the addictions we're trying to overcome, to trying to live the best life we can. Tonight, we're going to talk to a therapist that is going to share how important vulnerability and transparency is with her job, but also her personal life. This is The Venture Forward. Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you may be, and welcome. I am John Venturini, a recovering addict of alcoholism, overeating, obesity, and compulsive gambling. And I'm glad to have you on tonight on The Venture Forward. This story about vulnerability and transparency is basically one of the cornerstones on why there is a Venture Forward. Outside of the addictions that I've overcome, it's also the ability to be open and honest about what has transpired in my life. Talking about this on Tuesday was but the first step in doing that. Tonight, we have a very dear friend of the show who is a therapist to talk about vulnerability. To also talk about her take on vulnerability as she sees it in her clients, but also as she sees it in her own life. And we'll get to introducing her in a second. I want to say hello to all of you on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch this wonderful evening, or morning, or afternoon, wherever you may be. You know, I always neglect to say those other 2 times a day when I say that in the beginning, and then, oh well. It's time, right? Marilyn, good afternoon. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a great afternoon over by you. Sarah, I am having an adequate day. It's a very good way of putting it. It's been an adequate day. Has it been the best day? Some could say it was the best day. Was it the worst day? No, I don't think anyone could say it was the worst day. Adequate day? Perfect. Spot on, as always. Jamie, hey, how are you? Hope you're doing well. Sean, what's up? How you doing? Hope you're doing okay over by you. Good to see you on tonight. And thank you, man. Appreciate it. Appreciate the compliment there. Looking sharp. I appreciate that. And JV says, well, neat, Sean. And I agree. JV does look sharp. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, everybody, for joining me tonight. I appreciate it. Oh, and of course, Paul Burke has... Okay. Paul says, well, a venture forward, ... in shaving. I just shaved too. Look at us, a couple smooth fellas. Paul? That's the name of the show. A couple smooth fellas. You know what? That's spot on. Spot on, Paul. You know, I've been talking about having... I should bring her on, right? A very familiar face, the first person who has done the show 3 times now, in that of Ashley Blake. Ashley, it is an honor and pleasure to have you on the show. And yeah, I had a whole little thing here about, I should probably say that, right? An outpatient therapist from South Central PA. She knows a thing or two about addiction, mental health, and tonight's topic, vulnerability. It's an honor and pleasure. Everybody knows her. Everybody loves her. Ashley Blake, ladies and gentlemen.
Hi, John.
Hey.
Hi, everybody.
Was that a bit of a strange introduction?
It's better than the last 2 times where you just said my name.
Yeah.
I introduce myself.
Like, there's Ashley. We're gonna just start this. Yeah, let's go. Couple more comments real quick before we get started. Hey, Boomax, whoever that is. Boomax. Sean says Smooth Fella is now available on Hulu. Jamie says, hey, Ashley. And then Smooth Fella is a sequel of Goodfellas. And then Marilyn saying the same thing we all have in our minds and definitely feel. We love Ashley, for sure.
Thanks, Marilyn. Love you too.
All right. Vulnerability. I said a couple of things about vulnerability on Tuesday, but I think there is so many people that are now growing to how important the concept of vulnerability and transparency is when we're trying to live our lives and trying to overcome and face addiction, as we talked about all in season 1 and certainly in the episodes of season 2 as well. I guess my first question for you this evening, outside of how you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing okay.
Okay.
How's vulnerability as you see it?
Vulnerability, first off, does not mean weakness. A lot of people assume that, and it does not. But vulnerability is that ability to say, I don't have all the answers, and hey, I might just need some help.
Are there different levels in your opinion about how one could be very vulnerable, somewhat vulnerable, and moreover, when someone needs to be more vulnerable, what are some of the things you can do from your position, others, to help get them there?
Well, first off, yes, there are different levels of vulnerability and different places for those levels. You know, you're not going to be as vulnerable at work as you are going to be in a therapist's office. That's just the truth of it. But when I'm working with clients who are resistant to letting it go and getting fully honest and transparent and admitting they need help, I always reassure them that one, I care about them, and two, that this is a place of love and of honesty and of hope.
Yeah, I think reassuring those that have come to you for your trusted opinion, but also to be listening, but also providing them that sort of course correction is, I can understand that, and constantly monitoring that and helping that course correction per se.
Most definitely. But for a client to fully get what they really need from a therapist, they have to be vulnerable.
Yeah. I know on Tuesday I interchanged the term vulnerability with transparency. Is there a difference? Is there a bit of a difference between vulnerability as we know it and then transparency itself?
So transparency is part of vulnerability, but transparency on its own is really just being honest. Vulnerability is going a step further in that you're being honest that you don't have everything you need or everything you want, or you don't know the answer to a question, and admitting that you need help.
Yeah, and you know, you think about any recovery program, the first step is in lining in that, you know, we need help or we have a problem and we need to seek the sort of road we need to overcome it. And one, never admit that we can never stop being that, but overcoming it, coming up with a plan.
Yeah, step one of 12 of the 12-step programs, all of them really, is saying be vulnerable.
Yeah. I guess the next question I have is the sense that we talked about Brené Brown on Tuesday's episode as far as being one of the best authors out there, as far as vulnerability. Probably one of the prominent and only authors out there that talks mostly on vulnerability. From your perspective, what kind of speakers and authors that are out there for vulnerability that help you tell that story, that help you better understand that story?
You're right. It's Brené Brown. Brené Brown is not just an author. She researches vulnerability. And she not only researches it in, her patients, but also in her own life. And getting really honest with her own self about how she wasn't being vulnerable in her own life. I highly recommend everybody read or watch something she has done. She's amazing. But what she really harkens to is this idea that without vulnerability, there is no innovation, there is no change. So when we look at, the way society has progressed and inventions that come along and that sort of thing, that's somebody saying, this isn't the right answer. We need to do something else, and taking that risk, because there's a risk aspect to vulnerability too.
Of her work, and I assume you've read a great deal of it and have seen her speak and her podcasts and whatnot. what are some of the concepts, and you've mentioned a couple there already, but what are some of the key hallmarks that you facilitate in how you deal with clients, how you deal with others?
So, I always start with the basic of what is vulnerability, and then understanding the necessity of vulnerability for change, and the fact that bravery comes from vulnerability, right? To stand up for what you believe in, or what somebody else believes in, to go run into a burning building and save someone. That's coming from a place of vulnerability because you're putting yourself at such risk.
Right, right. I guess the other question I had there was, as far as her podcast, I always found that I get some of my best, whether it's Brené Brown or a lot of the other folks that I've talked about on this show, from podcasts, but also from reading, and also trying to incorporate that and forming my own twist on it. Has there been any sort of twist that you formed on the things you've learned from, say, Brené Brown?
I've changed it up a little with my teenagers when I treat them. Adolescents don't like to listen to adults, including adult therapists. So I kind of hearken it to, what would you do if someone's being bullied? And I start with that question. What would you do if you saw someone being bullied? And sort of form my lesson around vulnerability from that statement.
As being a young adult and teenager, and even in my adolescent, being bullied a lot, I mean, it was a very hard question to answer back then. I think, also being open and honest and transparent about what the other person's doing and what the situation's doing helps more times than not. I mean, yeah, that's a really great question to ask them, I'm sure.
Most definitely, especially those who haven't been bullied, because it's interesting the response you get versus what their actual actions in life say. Because they know what their answer should be, and that's the answer they give you. And then I'll go, so have you been doing that?
What is, I gotta ask that, what has the response been to that question, and if there's any aversion to that, what do you usually hear as basically, well, I can't do that, or that seems too hard, or I never thought of that?
Actually, when I ask that question, they usually don't want to talk any further.
Becomes radio silent.
You see the look in their eyes. And that's the truth of working with teenagers. There's a lot of silence.
Lots of silence. Speaking of silence, something that's not been happening in the comments. Let's go to some of the comments before we continue this conversation. Of course, I'm gonna have to put this up on the screen first because Paul, you said it, and your face is smoother than that intro. Heyo. I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing there, Paul. I know what you're doing. Jamie says when you can be vulnerable with the right people, right? With the right people safely, it is freedom.
It is. Because there's actually a lot of power within vulnerability.
Yeah. Sean says, opening up has been a process for me over time. I think that's also a societal thing with me being a man.
Yeah, there is this sort of stigma on men that the only acceptable emotion is anger.
Right.
Yeah, we seem to accept that, but we have a hard time allowing a man to be vulnerable.
Yeah. Do you find that changing in 2021?
We say it is, but I'm not really seeing it in practice.
Gotcha. Wanted to address something real quick before we continue with the questions, in the sense that there seemed to be a crackle in the background. So Sarah says, is anyone hearing crackle? And then Paul says, I thought it was my end, but there's a slight tick or crackle, almost like a mini thumper sound. Super minor. And then Jamie hears crackle as well. I don't think it was terrible, except of the very fast ticking. Please let us know in the comments if it continues. We'll do everything we can to clean this up in the replay. Let's see what else is going on here. Right. And I lost my place. Oh, there we go. Jamie says, Sean, I agree with that. A lot of stigma for men and vulnerability. So it's not only something that I think it's something that affects everybody, and it's all dependent on how much, going back to the whole concept of vulnerability, how much we are willing to open up.
Yeah. But not just that, but when it comes to the stigma, society allowing us to open up.
Sarah says her podcasts are great too. Dan and Brené Brown. Jamie's a fan as well. And then Sarah says, one of the things I'm working on is being vulnerable, by which By which O?
Sarah, I don't think you got your whole statement across there.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're working on being vulnerable, though.
Yeah, and at least putting part of the comment down. That was good. If I could figure out a way to get this working better. Do you guys mind me live troubleshooting real quickly in the middle of an interview? Why not, right? Now I can hear the ticking. There we go. Maybe if I turn it back the other way?
No, that's worse.
Oh, that's worse?
Yeah.
And it got
even worse.
And it got worse. So it's definitely that. And I think going all the way made it better because I don't hear the ticking on this side.
It's there, but
it's very minor. And let me try it on the software side. See, live troubleshooting. That's what you get on here. It's great. What if I go down that far? Is that better?
I can still hear it.
It's worse. It's slight. It's worse.
No.
The ticking. Okay, so I'll bring this comment up real quick. The tickling isn't that distracting. At least that's good. I didn't know that it was a question of tickling.
I'm impressed.
That's absolutely fantastic. Oh, and now Boomax. Welcome to the program tonight, Boomax. Thank you. Gone. She says it's gone. Okay.
Okay.
The mystery of the tickling. I mean the ticking.
It's still there.
Ticking. But then Sean says the tickling is on point. The ticking, however, yeah.
Yeah.
We got a little bit of everything tonight, didn't we? Let's talk about the settings of vulnerability in your life, but also in your practice and whatnot. In the sense that I want to look at it from a couple of different perspectives, and Sarah says it's not gone. Yeah, I'm getting the sense that it won't be gone, so I apologize in advance, and I will try to clean this up in the replay for sure. But thank you for mentioning it, and for all of you, quite frankly. Appreciate all of you. Being vulnerable with her ticking. See? That it
Yes.
Purely accidental. That wasn't intentional at all. But yes, Jamie, absolutely. So I guess the first question is kind of a backup of the questions we have from what you see from client to client to client, in a sense of what is the importance of vulnerability in your profession?
So professionally, from the client's perspective, I need my clients to be willing to be vulnerable in order to effect change.
Right.
If they come in not willing to be vulnerable, there's really no way for their lives to change.
Yeah. I guess that'd be true for a lot of the different concepts that you see when you see new therapists, especially after intake or whatnot, is the sort of commitment to change, and then more than willing whether or not to follow up and do the work that you asked them to do versus just letting it sit there.
Well, yeah, I mean, that willingness to do the work, sure, but it's also that willingness to be fully honest in session. Sometimes people go to therapy not because they wanted to. Sometimes they're forced into it by the criminal justice system, sometimes by a partner forcing them into it. And, they come into that with this mindset of, this isn't going to work, so I'm just not going to say the real truth.
I always wondered, and certainly through the therapy sessions I've had with my therapist, I always try to do the work or whatnot, but I can only imagine what they go through when the client they see is not willing to do the work, or being forced to be there for one reason or another.
You'd be surprised how many clients don't do the work, right? Whether it's something simple like practice challenging your automatic thoughts or something a little more complex, most of them don't do the work on the outside. People sometimes have the very mistaken belief that change happens in that hour in session. Change happens with what you do from that hour in session with the other hours of the day.
I guess the other, somewhat related to that, is what is amongst the clients that you see in historical and now, how important is vulnerability to them? And then moreover, if you have a conversation about vulnerability, what usually happens after that conversation?
So most clients come in with the mistaken belief of what vulnerability is, right? They go, vulnerability is weakness, which is not the correct definition of vulnerability. So usually when we get down to the roots of what vulnerability is and what it really means, there tends to be a bit of a breakthrough there, in that they're finally able to address, or at least state, what the real problem is. Because what I get at in an intake or a mental health evaluation is not the real issue. It generally is never the real issue.
It's almost interesting to see what gets masqueraded when, instead of talking about what the real issue is, how much of the minor issues ruminate to the front, or some of the faux issues ruminate to the front.
Exactly. People come in and say, oh, I'm just really stressed out at work and this and that. And then you find out that they've been in a compulsively abusive relationship for the last 20 years. But, I don't find that out till like 6 months down the road.
Usually, that's not going to happen in session 2 or 3.
No.
Moving outside of therapy, moving outside of what you do every day for your job, what is the importance of vulnerability in your personal life?
I mean, in my personal life, it's kind of dependent on where we're talking about in my personal life. It is important to be vulnerable with my partner. That's the most important relationship in my life and deserves the most transparency, the most honesty. But it varies, right? You're not going to go to the checkout counter at Target and give your life story.
Wait, people don't do that?
No. And if they do, I really recommend they get a mental health evaluation.
Oh.
Boundaries and all that jazz.
Yeah. All kidding aside, I mean, I know in going through as we say, rewinding the tape, I know there were times where, I always look for that level of vulnerability because I know I basically try to be as vulnerable as possible, but sometimes it's just not there. And I guess my question is, what does one do when they sense that their partner or whoever or whatever, right, is not being completely vulnerable to them outside of having a come to what moment?
First off, we have to acknowledge the fact that being vulnerable is hard. It's really hard. I'm a therapist. I want my clients to be vulnerable. I struggle being vulnerable too. It's human nature because of that fear of judgment, which is also human nature. But, if you sense that you're not getting the full answer, it's important to let them know that the space is safe and that you're asking questions out of a place of love and caring, not out of a place of judgment.
Right. I haven't talked much about that component of what this last 2 years have been. But I will in upcoming episodes. I feel like I'm coming close to a point now where I could talk about it more. But yeah, I would say, Ashley, that ruminates a lot with what I was thinking, but I wanted to get some sort of level of understanding there. So thank you. I guess the other thing is, side question, why is my handwriting awful? But that's another story for another day. What are some of so when you sense that there is a question of vulnerability, and going back to the therapy for a second, when you sense that there's vulnerability or a lack thereof, what are some of the facets that you share with respect to vulnerability, the premises of vulnerability? Basically everything we discussed thus far about Brené Brown, whatever, but what are some of those facets you share with your clients?
I mean, I tend to share some of the basic tenets of Brené Brown. I have been known to share parts of her TED Talk in session if I really am not getting my point across as to what vulnerability is. On occasion, if I sense that their issue is similar to something I have gone through, as long as it's something I've dealt with fully, I will sometimes self-disclose. Those times are few and far between. Prime example, I did have a client recently get diagnosed with diabetes. I happen to have diabetes, so it was connecting through that and letting her know that this isn't some crazy sort of death sentence. And that it's okay to be scared, but it's also okay to talk about it.
Communication helps an awful lot, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of communication, had some comments while we were going through all of that. Hang on a second. Oh, here it is. Here we go. Sean says sometimes in group sessions at rehab, people were too concerned with looking good rather than being brutally honest.
That is a common occurrence in groups. If you've got a good therapist there, they will challenge that. When I run groups, I always tell people, feel free to call BS on your fellow group members.
The old Bravo Sierra detector?
Yes.
Sean also says the truth is often ugly.
Oh yeah, the truth is not pretty. The truth has many facets to it, and that's why we're afraid to be brutally honest and fully vulnerable.
Jamie says, my group therapy I go to helps with vulnerability, but sometimes I do struggle outside of therapy with the work I need to do. Sometimes I need to be pushed back into the work.
Yeah, finding that self-motivation outside of group or outside a session, it can be hard, especially when in session you've got all these people around you, right, in a group that understands your feelings and everything else. But you go home and it's just you, and you don't have them there pushing you. Self-motivation is probably what people struggle with the most when it comes to change. It's actually taking those steps.
Jamie says, cliche, but the truth is freeing in the long run, and being truthful is less exhausting than having to constantly backtrack and remember your lies.
Oh, yes. If you're somebody who has built your whole life on lies, that all you're doing is trying to keep track of all of them. And if you keep doing it, you'll get to that point where you have no sense of self anymore.
Sean says to Jamie, acting like you're okay when you're not is exhausting.
Very much so. And so many of us pretend we're okay.
Ain't that the truth? Jamie then says, exactly, Ashley, no boundaries of your giving your life story to anyone who will listen.
Mm-hmm.
And said, Sean, yes, it is, and bad for your health.
Not just your mental health, your physical health, too.
Sort of how the body will basically implode inside.
Exactly.
And
or when people have chronic anxiety, don't talk about it or do anything about it and end up with 6 ulcers.
Or have issues with, your central nervous system.
Exactly.
Sarah says it's hard to have a healthy relationship if there isn't a mutual commitment to being vulnerable. It's not instant. It's developing trust over time.
Most definitely. You're not going to be vulnerable with someone the very first time you meet them. We test vulnerability when we're forming new relationships, whether it's the therapist-client relationship, romantic relationships, friendships. We test that because we put little nuggets of things out there, of just small vulnerable pieces that won't hurt so bad if they throw it back at you.
Jamie says 100% Sarah, issues like that ended my last relationship. And then Sean says to Jamie, I can really relate to the needing to be pushed back into the work. My sponsor has to push me.
It's part of the reason why there's sponsors in 12-step programs, to keep you in the work.
Yeah, the value of the sponsor, whether the addiction is alcoholism or drugs or gambling or overeating, is such an important role as far as us staying accountable, but also us sticking to the 12 steps and getting to that level of recovery we need to.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah says a lot of people don't change until it's more painful not to.
That's very much the truth, especially with addiction. When people hit their rock bottom, whatever that may be, or they're facing possible years and years of prison time, that's when they're finally willing to say, hey, I need help and I can't do this on my own. And that's vulnerability.
And Jamie says, Sarah, yes, and Sean, my sponsor, does too. She's awesome. It's good to have a great sponsor. One question came up before, and I guess I should basically address this real quickly. And it was that in, let's see if I get it up there. Someone asked before, how do you buy a coffee? Well, I mean, you go up to the Starbucks counter and you ask them what you want, and I'll explain that. On the ticker, I list the dates and times that the show is on, but there's also a link there for buymeacoffee.com/venture forward. It is a place where, for us contributors, us creators that don't have the necessary subscriber levels yet with any of the major platforms, it's a way for us to provide a mechanism for us to get something back, right? And truth is, I appreciate the go buy a coffee. It's something I use for other creators. Very simple system to use. Very, very fortunate for it. So if you see the ticker, it's there, and I humorously call it "Go buy Rex a coffee" because he's got a seriously bad Americano problem. But yeah, that's how you contribute to the show. So thank you for the question, and it gave me a chance to explain this whole ticker that's on the bottom now. It's like, are you expecting traffic and weather there soon? Oh boy. And Paul says caffeine, baby. Yes, caffeine indeed. All right. So I had a few more questions, and the thing is, we've kind of hinted at it before, talking about sponsors, talking about all of that, but the importance of vulnerability with addiction. And I think the first question I had for you is there one addiction more than another where vulnerability is more important?
There's not one where it's more important, but there's one where it tends to be harder for people to admit, and that's with gambling. That tends to be the addiction that people try to cover up the longest because of the financial burdens related to it.
I know a thing or two about that. But I guess my question therein is it straight gambling? Is do we find ourselves in a more accelerated environment now because of the density and also availability of gambling in society?
Well, yeah, it's very easy to gamble at this point. There's no more going to the casino. And for a long time, it was going to a casino in only one of like 4 states that had gambling. Now there's a much larger market, and then the proliferation of gambling to other platforms. You've got online gambling. You have gambling in gas stations now as a thing.
I don't understand the gas station gambling beyond the wildest sense of imagination, because you think about that setting for a second, and I think of the truck stop, right? And a trucker may be going state to state to state and stops at a truck stop and now is basically squandering some of that truck money on a video poker machine or a slot machine or whatever they have, or VGTs, as we said on the gambling episode, video gaming terminals.
Yes.
It's mind-blowing, but I could also understand that without that vulnerability, without that sort of transparency about it, it could become a bigger and bigger and bigger problem.
Well, especially in that type of a setting or in the online setting, it seems less real than when you're shelling out cash at the casino.
Yeah, so the ATM machine at the travel center versus going to, say, the casino down the street or the casino in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. There's a level of difference therein too.
It seems less of a problem when in fact it can be much more of a problem.
Yeah. Is it necessarily the brick and mortar casino, the gas station casino, that is raising a light as far as how bad gambling is, but moreover how bad gambling is with vulnerability?
No. It's online, and it's the now weird proliferation of gambling within video games.
Is there any... So what would be an example, without mentioning names per se, of that?
So there are games out there that use gambling mechanisms to earn game currency to buy items within the game. So it'll be like a completely different sort of game, but then there's this little side game of like Mahjong going on, or a side game of poker going on, to earn money within the game to then buy items in the game.
Yeah, it's incredible how we make it beyond easy for anyone to start gambling things they should not be gambling, or going down the idea of an addiction that they shouldn't be jumping down, and not realizing at first that they're addicted, but then learning when it's too late that they're addicted. A couple of comments about the gambling, because that brought up some comments here. Sean says, that's interesting about gambling and people wanting to hide it. I know with my compulsive spending and credit card debt, I hid it out of shame.
Yeah, we are a country that values money and success, and we've kind of been taught to be ashamed of debt.
Sarah alluded to that point. Money shame is huge in our culture. Talking about money is more taboo than talking about sex.
It's true. Early in my career, before I was ever a therapist, I worked in the Child Support Enforcement Office, where literally it was my job to talk about people's incomes to calculate child support orders. And the look on people's faces when I would ask them how much they earned. Most of them did not want to answer that question.
The thing is, and then the preponderance of these truck stop 10 machine sort of gaming holes, right? Oh, good old truck stops, Jamie says. And then Paul puts it to this: gas and gambling, the filler up fix.
Among other issues with truck stops.
Right.
That's
right.
a different show.
That's 2 weeks from now. Jamie says, Sarah, that's a good point. Never thought of that. And then I guess within there, Sean also says, within the next month or so, I'm going to have all my credit card debt paid off, and that's a sigh of relief.
Congratulations. That is something that's really hard to do.
That is incredibly strong, Sean. And I guess this would be a point for me to say that tomorrow I have a call with my bankruptcy attorney as that story continues, because I have been such an abuser of money, but that also talks to the fact that I had a major issue with vulnerability and transparency when it comes to that and my other addictions. But Sean, that is incredible, and we are very proud of you here. As Danielle says, that is awesome, Sean, for sure. I guess, and a hi to Gillyman, finishes 11.2 mile run, time to relax and venture forward into some steak. Yes, and I'm glad you're here to enjoy that steak for us. That's great. So outside of just the idea of addiction, we kind of hinted at it before, but the importance of vulnerability in relationship. What are some of the facets that you see within the importance of vulnerability within relationships? Not only traditional relationships, but I guess the whole wide gamut of relationships.
Okay. So when we're talking just sort of standard you and a partner sort of relationship, vulnerability is a necessity. When I do couples therapy, the first thing I notice is that lack of vulnerability with the partners. You know, you have to be your authentic self with your partner in order for it to succeed. But we can expand this, right? Vulnerability with our families. That can be really difficult, especially if you grew up in a family that was emotionally closed off. And sometimes it's not good to be vulnerable with family members. You know, if you've got somebody in active addiction in your household, you probably shouldn't be very vulnerable with them. If you're dealing with a domestic violence situation, you're not going to be vulnerable with your abuser.
Right. Which I guess, thinking about what sort of things can get hidden in a relationship, whether it's a compulsive gambling problem or alcoholism or whatever, it's the sort of thing that without recognizing it can be a disastrous situation. But moreover, it could stand to be something that allows the relationship to heal if both sides of the relationship realize there's a problem, we're addressing it, and we're going to work open and honestly on how it's being addressed.
Well, it's also addressing what the root of that problem is. So a lot of these things stem from other problems that we are not being vulnerable with and admitting that we can't handle on our own. And instead of addressing it and saying, hey, I need help with this, we turn to our addictions.
Sean just put in a comment I want to put up. He says, that's a great point. Be careful who you share good news or bad news with. Some people don't have your best interests in mind.
That's correct. Like, if you know somebody's the office gossip, you're probably not going to tell them something because they're going to tell everybody in the office.
But then there's also times where people that are close to us and that our family do right by us as we're trying to do better in our lives. Sean, you made a point to that about 3 minutes ago in the sense that your parents had a lot to do with it. They helped quite a bit in realizing you had a problem with your debts and you're addressing it and realizing that and knowing who your true proponents are. That's the most important thing you can do. So that's how it goes both ways, for sure.
Yeah, it's about knowing who you can be vulnerable with.
Jamie says, I learned the hard way of being vulnerable with the wrong people.
Yeah. I think many of us have had that person who we think is a friend, but they're not really a friend, and your vulnerability being used against you. And that's what leads to people not being vulnerable in the future.
Mm. As Sarah said, it was the four horsemen of the apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about the importance of vulnerability within your relationships, but also with your family. And you mentioned the domestic violence, but also codependency, I would say.
Oh, most definitely. When you got two people in any type of relationship that are codependent, vulnerability doesn't have a place in that at the moment because you got to address the codependency first.
Mm. And then I guess the sort of delimiter between codependency and co-addiction.
Well, yeah. I mean, that harkens back to my point about dealing with somebody in any sort of active addiction.
Is there a sort of, I know each of the major anonymous groups, recovery groups, have different rules about how long one must be sober or be away from it or, totally refrain before they can start making movement towards not necessarily reacclimating or reintegrating, but living a life free and cognizant of it. Outside of any sort of qualitative test, is there a line in the sand as far as period of time?
Not specifically. I mean, a lot of places say a year. I say it's when you get to know yourself and you're comfortable with yourself.
Couple comments. Jamie says, this is going to be a weird one, but I know I'm being vulnerable when I decide not to wear makeup some days.
Yes, I agree with you. Fully. As a woman who wears makeup most days.
Paul also mentions he loves a good use of the word hearken.
You're welcome, Paul.
And Sean says something that we all agree. You look great either way, Jamie. LOL. It's amazing how much we will draw to that sort of addiction, whether it is a negative addiction that we've talked about on the show, but also, dare I say, a positive firefighter that is there to take the energies that we had in a negative place before, but now we're doing something positive with that same sort of fervor and energy. I liken it to something, and you mentioned the makeup there, Jamie. I'll do one for one with you. It's the it's the wall push-ups and squats I do in the shower. And it's something I said, I really need to start building muscle mass. And I started doing that. And by Jove, I started noticing some muscle mass. Because I've dedicated that energy that would have been doing something really not as fruitful to something like that. Jamie says, "Thank you, Sean, and I'm glad you relate, Ashley." And Paul says, "Good old hashtag simp that made me laugh." And then Paul, good question. I'm glad you asked it, Paul. A slippery shower doesn't sound like the best place to do wall push-ups. It is a shower that has a flat surface. It's not a bathtub. It's perfectly safe. It's not slippery at all.
You say this, and then tomorrow you will have a sprained ankle.
If I do, I will hobble into my office for VF Talks at 5:15 Eastern, 2:15 Pacific. And yes, that's a shameless plug. This dude's dangerous. Yeah, I'm a bit dangerous. What of it? Couple more questions, and I have to say this. I really am thankful that you've done this show on topics relating to co-addiction, but also therapy, and I really appreciate you jumping on the show, especially talking about something like vulnerability. So I thank you in advance before we put a giant bow on it. I do have two questions that I wanted to ask you though, and I think for me this next question is a bit selfish, in the sense that, in your eyes and from what you know, does neurological disorder, neurological disease, or mental illness prevent one from truly being vulnerable?
It can, because of fear of judgment. We hold so many stigmas in this society, and I kind of hearken this back to. That's right, Paul. I used hearken again. I hearken this back to Britney Spears in 2007, right? We all know what happened there. Britney shaved her head. She was in the middle of a serious mental health crisis. And the media was calling her crazy, saying she didn't deserve to be a mother. She should never see her kids again. All this terrible stuff, because they thought they could get away with it because she was a celebrity. But here she was, truly suffering.
Yeah.
None of us want our lives scrutinized in that way.
Especially someone who might be emotionally fragile at a certain point in her life where things are coming to her and she's building a career, and then all of that starts happening.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a kind of side question on that. We mentioned the word freely in mass society here, but the word crazy, is it a bad word?
Is it a bad word?
Yeah.
No. Is it a word that we shouldn't use when we're talking about people? Yeah. Because it oversimplifies everything, and it has such a negative connotation. If you say somebody with bipolar disorder is crazy, suddenly you are putting them in this place where they are an outcast in society.
Yeah. It's amazing how, when talking about vulnerability and transparency, and we talk about how easy it is to share our opinion and share our mind in 2021, but moreover the last 20 years, right? We call social media and the internet. How much we take advantage of others and forget that there are other people watching, other people listening, and just making a blanket comment like someone's quote unquote crazy. It's not really the right thing to say when you don't know the complete story. And even if you do, you don't say that.
Well, what's happened with the internet is we're not really seeing people face to face when we make these comments. And plenty of people will write things, in the comment section on something, or on Twitter or on Facebook, that they would never say in person to someone.
Yeah. It puts that sort of shade of freedom, that sort of, I can hide behind a handle, I can hide behind comments and throw as much vitriol and as much garbage in one direction, and I'll feel better about myself because I got those comments out, but yet I might have enlisted some damage, especially if the frame of the person in question, the frame of the person you're talking to, is not the strongest that can be.
Yeah.
I guess the other question I had for you is more for you because you've done this show 3 times. I'm very appreciative of you doing the show 3 times. Is there anything you want to share with the audience? And moreover, is there anything you want to plug or talk about?
I don't really have anything to plug, you know. I'm just a therapist day in and day out. Um, I think, you know, one thing y'all got to understand, I guess, about therapists is as much as we preach vulnerability, we don't get to practice it as therapists with our clients. And sometimes we take that home with us, and it's harder for us to be vulnerable at home. And I fully admit I'm not always the greatest at being vulnerable.
It's something where it's something I've said on this show before: progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
And you're not going to be perfect every single day and every single week and every single month, but as long as you're putting your best foot forward and you're doing what you can, that's all you can do.
Exactly.
But I truly appreciate everything you've provided for the show, but also all the advice you've given and everything. You're a fantastic guest, and I'm muchly appreciative of it for sure.
Thank you. I
some
enjoyed doing your
some
show.
other comments here in the sense that I'm going there for a second. Be Still My Heart, the word Harkin and Brittany reference. Thank you, Ashley. There you
You're
go.
welcome, Paul. That was 100% just for you.
You should isolate that, Paul, and remember that is just for you, Paul Burke, the provider,
Just for you.
the provider of the funny, for sure. Jamie says, I usually use cray cray, but always in a joking manner, never in regards to actual mental status.
Yeah. I mean, the key here is what you're talking about, right? So if you're talking about some TV show and some, you're watching The Real Housewives and it's the chaos that is, The Real Housewives, you can say that was cray cray. That's fine.
Sarah says, crazy is tossed around as a judgment about mental health. Talk about shame and stigma. Mental illness is physical illness.
It is, because our brain is part of our body.
So she said, the brain is part of the body.
Great minds think alike, Sarah.
Sarah also asks, Ashley, is it harder because of the boundaries you have to keep with clients?
Most definitely. There are those times where you do want to be vulnerable or you do want to share something that is similar to what they're going through to get them to recognize that, it does get better from where they are, but you also don't want to get into that land of countertransference where you're putting your stuff on your client.
Yeah. Jamie says, exactly, Sarah, they go hand in hand. And then also the brain and the gut too.
Yes. Yes. And for those of you who don't know, serotonin is made in the stomach.
And Paul says, clip the comment, that the shout out. You made someone's day there, Ashley, but you made a lot of people's days for sure, because many people have this to say. Marilyn says, we really appreciate you, Ashley. Thank you for educating us. Jamie says, always good to hear your input and knowledge. And Sean says, we appreciate you, Ashley. You always have great insights.
Thank you, everybody.
And let me echo their comments and add a couple of my own. Ashley, you're phenomenal. Not only are you a great guest for this show, but you've been an incredible, dear person to me, and I appreciate you greatly. And I thank you for all that you do. You're incredible. And your insights, your judgment, your sense of humor, all of it, you're absolutely phenomenal, and I appreciate you so much.
Thanks, John.
All my love. I will put a giant bow on this, and let me do that, and I will talk to you soon. Ashley Blake, ladies and gentlemen, she is phenomenal at what she does. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure to have her on the program 3 times. A little bit of inside baseball, because we're talking about vulnerability and transparency. I haven't had the best of weeks, in the sense that I'm still dealing with the exacerbation and everything with MS. And there are days where I'm on fire, and then there are days that I'm not. And I would say today being one of them. Tuesday was another one as well. And I appreciate everybody's love and care and support and all the comments that you've been sharing with me, and your friendship. I appreciate and adore all of you. You make me, you're helping me in a very difficult time in my life, and I appreciate that, and I love you all. And Ashley, you know I love you for sure. If I think of the word love, I think of you, absolutely, Ashley. And thank you for again doing the show. That said, I might as well do a little more inside baseball on this, in the sense that I do have a meeting with my bankruptcy attorney tomorrow morning, and if I'm not thinking about that right now and don't seem a bit jittery, that is why. So I know it's all good. We're trying to remove a lot of that debt that's in my life, but to say that I'm not thinking about the call tomorrow morning would be a lie. I am absolutely thinking about it, and to say that I've been sleeping like a baby all week, that would be a lie too. It's been rough, but I know tomorrow is the pathway to starting to fix these things for sure. The paperwork has been sent to, I keep on saying 150 pages. It was 225 pages of records I sent to my attorney. So we'll be talking about all that tomorrow morning, for sure. No new news on the MS stuff. I know I'm due to go in for the next round of Pox and Hep B. So to get myself closer to starting to take Ocrevus or whatever you want to call it, tomato. So that's well along the way, and that is a work in progress too. But again, it's more akin to the fact that if we're not tackling one thing, we're tackling 3, 5, 11 things at the same time. And that said, tomorrow, 5:15 Eastern, 2:15 Pacific, we have another edition of VF Talks. But before I put a bow on this, some more comments from all of you. Sarah says, yes, Jamie, there are more neurotransmitter receptors in the gut than the brain. Jamie says, great show tonight. Thank you, Jamie, for popping on. I appreciate it. Sean says, we're here for you just like you're here for us. Always, always, Sean. I'm here for all of you. I appreciate you guys, and I love you with all my heart, for sure. Boomax says, love you, John. Love you too, Boomax. Jamie says, we love you too, Jamie. I definitely love you, Jamie, for sure. Sean says, you got this, John, one step at a time. Yeah, one step at a time, one foot in front of the other. It's what we got to do, right? Jamie says, you're taking the right steps. It's scary, but you're taking care of business. Yeah, thank you. All of you, thank you very much. And Sean says, I'm celebrating 10 months sobriety today, and streams like this are to thank amongst many other things. Well, Sean, congratulations with your sobriety. It's very important what you're doing, and you are definitely an inspiration to a lot of people, including myself, Sean. Keep up the great work. Keep on doing the darn thing. You are amazing. Love you too, for sure. And congratulations, Sean. And on that, I'm going to wrap up this show as I wrap up every other Venture Forward and VF Talks. Stay safe, stay sane, stay strong, stay sober. You're worth it. I'll see you tomorrow night at 5:15 Eastern, 2:15 Pacific, with a certain cantankerous Triceratops who thinks he's a T-Rex that really would like you to buy him coffee. Just saying, he would like you to buy him coffee. Anyhow. Have a great night, guys. Take care.